second. I'm Dan Fromer. I'm the editor-in-chief at Recode, which is Vox Media. Yeah, thank you. Recode.net, Vox Media's business and technology news network. And we cover innovation very broadly, including food and commerce, two of my favorite topics. And I'm really excited about our next session here. I get to interview one of my favorite entrepreneurs. I can't think of someone who's doing it in a more modern way than Christina Tosi, the founder of Milk Bar. She created Milk Bar in 2008, and you've probably seen her on TV, on MasterChef, and other series. And I'm really excited to hear how she did it and what she's working on next. She also created those birthday truffles that you all have there. So, exactly. Enjoy those, and let's start the talk. Christina Tosi.
Introduction. Thank you.
Of course. Welcome.
Are we going to have to stare at my face up here?
Yeah. Those cookies working for y'all? Or the
Those truffles?
Okay, great.
We figured like daylight savings time, we'd just give you like, you could just climb back in to what is now the time zone we
breakfast dessert. It's my new
breakfast for
favorite
dessert,
meal.
100%. I eat dessert before the savory food when I'm in control. When I have to like dine at somebody else's pace, then like savory comes first. But if I have it my way, it's 100%.
I think this is a new restaurant concept we've just invented.
Yeah, dessert first.
We'll talk about that. Let's start with the beginning. How did you get involved in the food industry? What's your story?
So I've had a sweet tooth always. Like I'd say sweet teeth run in my family. My mom has a sweet tooth. My dad has a sweet tooth. So it starts there, just loving dessert. I was an infamously picky eater as a kid and would basically be like, I just want to eat a brownie sundae for dinner. And then triangulate that with the fact that the matriarchs in my family were just the kind of women that cooked and baked at home. We didn't go out to eat at restaurants. I grew up in like the farmlands of Ohio and the suburbs of Virginia. And so there wasn't a restaurant. It didn't make sense to go out to a restaurant because it wasn't great or it was cost more than to make it at home. And I was just raised by a family that's like, if you can do it yourself, you don't pay someone to do it. So we cooked and baked, and I'm the youngest in my family. And so my mom was a working mom, and she would just, my grandmas and my aunts would be in charge of me, or she would be cooking something and she'd be like, I don't have enough time to like play with you, come into the kitchen. And so the kitchen ended up, my love for just eating dessert intersected with the fact that I felt, and I still feel the most comfortable and the most myself in the kitchen, because that was always where, like, whether I was like a chubby little redheaded bowl cut kid or an awkward teenager going through puberty, that was the place that was my safe place. And it was the place that I was always loved and accepted by these incredible women. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, that it was my happy place, and I knew that I was a happy person, or that I was in pursuit of finding something that would guarantee that I'd be a happy person my whole life.
And what was the path that realization then got you to New York and cooking in a real kitchen?
So I went to college to study because that was really important for my parents. They were first generation college goers, and you know, as generations go, you work really hard to make sure the generation that you are rearing is set up for even greater success than you were. So I went to college and I realized that like I didn't want a 9-to-5 job. My folks were both a really passionate accountant and a really passionate agricultural economist, like the most passionate accountant you would ever meet. And I realized in doing that I couldn't think of that type of like secure job that brought that kind of passion out of me. And so I graduated from college and I was like, ooh, they're not going to be happy. Applied mathematics and the Italian language.
Amazing.
Right brain, left brain. Those were two things that I was really passionate about, but I was like, well, I don't want to be someone's translator or.
I see both of those in your work though, but we can.
Totally.
Yeah.
But like real talk, my parents were very like firm and fair, but I knew what was expected of me, and I knew it was like time to be a grown up. And so I just had a moment with myself where I asked myself, like, okay, well, what is it that you're passionate about? And more than anything, what is it that you can wake up and do every single day, good day, bad day, and be really happy about and not be sick of? Because that's what my parents did every single day with their professions. And my answer to myself was very simple, and it was make cookies. And there was no filter there. When I say it now, even as a grown-up, with an empire built around it, there's a moment where I'm like, oh my God, that's the silliest thing that you would ever say, and why would you say that out loud? But it was so true and so honest, and so I did that. But I'm also a very competitive person. I'm more self-competitive than anything else, and so I had to translate that very simple, filter-free answer of make cookies to what that actually meant as a profession. And for me, it was like, well, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be the very best that I can be, and that means the very best of the best. And so I was like, great, I'm going to move to the best city, the most intense city, the city that is best known for great food, and I'm going to enroll myself in the best culinary school, and I'm going to go and work in the toughest restaurants, and I am going to be the best pastry chef.
And you did it.
Out there. Yeah. I know, it's so funny though, because again, like, I'm not waking, I moved to New York. I had been there for like 4 hours once as a teenager, had never been. I just knew that is where I belonged. I knew that was my calling. I knew that it was intense. Everything about it was like just gutturally correct. And so I like told my mom 2 days before, I was like, hey, so I'm going to move to New York in 2 days, and I'm going to go to culinary school. Like, I've already enrolled, and I'm going to find an apartment, and I'm going to find a job. And for me, it was like, it was a very personal time and a really beautiful time and a really strong time, but also a very solitary time, because it was something that belonged to me and was me, but I had no one else in my world or in my circle that had an attachment to food, that had a place for me to stay in New York City. It was just what I knew I was and what I was going to be and what I needed to do. And so I moved to New York, and I went to culinary school, and I would just stick my foot in the door of, the biggest or best or most intense and most competitive restaurants and get all the experience possible.
What was the New York restaurant scene like back then? Was it
Okay, so that's a great question, because this is 2003 at this point. The restaurant scene was very, very, very different. Eater didn't exist then. When you wanted to find out, the dining scene was much more high end, so it was more about like your number of stars for the New York Times, which it still is now on some level, but it was fine dining, and then everyone else in pursuit of fine dining, of that 4-star dining experience and rating from the New York Times. And the only way you found out about that was by going to the newsstands or the bodega at Tuesday night in the middle of the night and trying to figure out which papers got dropped off at which stands first and second, and you would read the Wednesday food section to figure out like what was going on in food and what was interesting. Like, most magazines weren't really covering food. New York Magazine was a little bit, but it was such a cult, beautiful, protected time, but also so much of it was word of mouth. This guy did exist, but that was much more of like New York dining, and it was rated by the people that went to restaurants, and so it was very, very different than it is today. But it was all about fine dining. And you went
to work for those stuffy fine dining restaurants.
I did, because that was where you went to get your chops. I would liken it to my mother as an accountant. She got out of school. She was like, I'm going to be the best accountant there is. And she went and like got her chops at one of the really, really, really big accounting firms, and you get your butt kicked and you don't get paid. You get paid very, very, very little. It's kind of like a joke of like, you should probably just not pay me because it's less offensive if that's the case. But you do, right? Where you're like, no, let's just say that I'll do it rather than like getting paid pennies. But
where'd you work? Where'd you end up working?
I worked at Boulay first. I worked at Boulay for 1.5 years, which was downtown. It's now a Citibank on West Broadway. I know. But it had this entry room that was full of apples. It was this foyer, and when you walked in, it was its own room, and you walked in and it smelled like the most amazing, beautiful apples, and it was covered in apples, and it was like this. opulent, but in this way that was very emotional. And it was one of the great 4-star dining restaurants of the time, and it was intense. It was everything that you hear about nowadays, of like all of the things that you would be called out on in a heartbeat, from like intensity and yelling and screaming and understaffed and like crazy hours and like people not treating each other well. And I was one of maybe 2 women that worked in the kitchen, and I worked in the pastry department. This other woman worked like a totally different shift, and it was all of those things. And on some like crazy masochistic effed up level, I loved it because I was in it. And it was like I was finally at like the battle line to be like, all right, my friend, what are you made of, and how much do you how much do you mean the things that you say in your head? And I just went.
So you did that.
Yeah.
I assume you learned stuff there. And then,
So much.
And what was the path then to Milk Bar? How did that?
I worked for a few other chefs. I had a moment of like, I was really trying to connect this concept of make cookies with be the best pastry chef. And every time I would work in one of these intense dining environments, I would inevitably, like after a year and a half, end up leaving in search of another opportunity. Sometimes because stylistically I was trying to round out like my worldview of food and technique, or how you run a kitchen and a dining experience, how you set up a menu. But I would also jump to other jobs. Like I was an editorial assistant at Savour. I would volunteer to do that on my one day off at Boulay, because I was like, I don't know, maybe I actually want to write about food, or maybe I want to be a food stylist. Or there was a point where I worked at Per Se in the front of the house, because I was just really curious about what that part of this wild, wonderful world that I was, head set on dominating was like. So I actually went out and got a ton of different experiences. And when I look back, part of that was also because I couldn't quite picture myself in any of it specifically. And I ended up coming out of the industry for a second and going like, I don't want to be the pastry chef of this really fancy fine dining restaurant. I can do it. I've pursued it, but it's actually like gutturally filter free, like no filter. It's not actually me. And neither is food styling, and neither is this, and neither is that. I don't want to be a captain at Per Se. So what do I want to do? And it wasn't until I met Dave Chang in 2005, 2006, that I actually met someone that was doing something that I could really relate to, which is, Dave was, hilariously enough, came from the same area of Virginia, and he went to culinary school, and he worked for great chefs, and he ended up opening Momofuku Noodle Bar because he was kind of maybe a little bit fed up with fine dining. I don't want to put words into his mouth, but he was like democratizing this approach to great food of like, I know how to make great food, but why do I have to wear a toque, and why do I have to be in this kind of, why is it that it only exists in this environment? I'm just going to march to the beat of my own drum. And it was loud, and it was unapologetic, and the food was delicious, and for some reason it just made absolute sense for me. So I started working for him in an operations capacity.
And then what?
Well, I love to bake, and when you love to do anything, you do it at all times of the day and night when you have a little free time. And he knew that I had a lot of experience baking, and he didn't have desserts on the menu. He needed a little bit of help. And so he kind of just like, we would joke about me putting a dessert on the menu at Sambar, at Noodle Bar for a while. And I wasn't super sure of myself. Momofuku also like kind of has Asian undertones, and that's not, I literally was
subtle
like,
way of putting it.
I was
yeah.
born in like the cornfields of Ohio, right? Like that, like I can't, it's not, the intersection of, how does the intersection of those things work? And finally one day he was just like, we got in an argument. He was like, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Just go in there and make something. And I made a dessert for Sambar one night in 2006. And like,
what was it? Do you remember?
Yeah, of course I do. It was a strawberry shortcake, but it wasn't like a podunk strawberry shortcake. It was like a strawberry shortcake where every single thing was really thoughtfully put together, and there for me were like my personal influences on it, like a really great, like just slightly sweetened biscuit that was rolled in confectioner's sugar. So when you baked it, it had this crackle and this edge that was kind of curious. And I macerated these really great farm fresh strawberries with sugar and a little bit of salt and a little bit of balsamic vinegar, because macerated, I mean, listen, I love sugar more than most people, but like it's about, a great dessert is about balance, not just about making it sweet. And I made I made a whipped cream, but I put some sour cream in it because that for me is, it shouldn't just be fatty. Acid has an important role in it, and we hit it on the menu. It wasn't like, here's dessert.
This is the math major.
I know. We hit it on the menu because we didn't say, here's dessert, who wants it? We hit it under like market. We had a section that just was market, and it was whatever we were digging at the market then. And it sold, and nothing fantastic happened except for that people all ordered it and paid for it and cleaned their bowls. And so I made it again, and this whole thing sort of built. I'm a long distance runner, so like once I start going on something, it's like you almost have to like tackle me to get me to stop doing it, because I am like, that steady pursuit for me is like, once I lace up my shoes and start, I don't stop.
Started making dessert, and then at what point does that become its own shop?
Next to Sambar, we had this. New York real estate is super finicky, and there was this old laundromat that was coming up. We had a new building owner. He wasn't sure if he liked us, and the smartest play was to take over this laundromat and just occupy the whole ground floor. And we didn't have a concept at Momofuku to put in, and I was like making these desserts for the restaurants in the basement from like 2 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's what when we had the space and the time. And Dave was like, I think you should just take it over and make this like crazy bakery that I know you're dreaming about in your head. Like, I know that's what you want to do. You want to be like an old lady and a forever young child at the same time through a bakery. I know you. And he was just like, I think you should just do it. Like, I will 100% give you the kick. I'll give you the seed money. Like, just go, basically. And so I did.
Milk Bar was born.
Milk Bar was born November 15th, 2008.
Boom. What was the opening menu?
Oh my God, I brought the opening menu up the other day. It's a really funny menu. It's a menu that when I go into really young, talented chefs' places, whether they're sweet or savory restaurants, and I look at the menu, I'm like, I see you. It was all the things that I wanted to serve with very little editing. So it had the things that you know. It had crack pie, and it had compost cookies, and it had cereal milk ice cream. But we had 4 different flavors of ice cream, and we had about 10 different toppings, including like, I love like a Frosty and a French fry, or for me, Milk Bar was built in part on this inspiration of a modern day Dairy Queen, because every Thursday night my family would go to Dairy Queen or Baskin Robbins if we were good, and at Dairy Queen you could buy French fries and dip them in your ice cream. So I had like these tiny little fingerling potatoes I'd get from the market and make into potato chips, things that operationally make no sense. We had 8 different flavors of layer cake. We had 10 different flavors of cookies, because they were all of these ideas that I was so passionate about. But I had every clue how to make them all delicious, but I also had no clue how to think about it from a guest perspective. We opened the doors November 15, 2008, and I don't know where these people came from, but they were lining up outside around the corner because they knew and loved and trusted Momofuku. But the line would move like a snail, because one, it was 100% not your average bakery. You will never find just a chocolate chip cookie or just a slice of apple pie at Milk Bar, which I can Dear Diary you about at another time. But then also you had like 10 different cookies to choose from, and not a single one of them is one you had ever had before. So
Where did you come up with, like, where does crack pie start, or cereal milk?
Cereal milk's a good one. Cereal milk I actually developed in 2007 when we opened Momofuku Co., which was Dave's tasting menu only restaurant in the East Village, and was him, hilariously enough. He started this noodle bar, this very democratic people's approach, and then ended up building a tasting menu only restaurant over time. And I needed to make a dessert that could be delicious and executable whether I was there or whether I was running around doing something else. And a panna cotta is a very, very easy, if done well, elegant way to make a dessert as a pastry chef. And I was like, great, panna cotta is technically cooked milk, if you are conjugating it from an Italian standpoint. But it's basically flavored milk that you set with gelatin. And so I was like, all right, panna cotta is usually boring. It's flavored milk. It's usually vanilla or chocolate. Maybe it's lemon or buttermilk. But like, what is an interesting flavor of milk? It didn't come that simply. I know that when you say it, and you're like, duh, of course. But I went to a bodega late at night and was just walking up and down the aisles being like, what can I make my milk taste like? And I walked down the cereal aisle and was like, this is either going to be a really good idea or a really bad idea. And it ended up being a great idea. And it was first the flavor of a plated dessert. And I fed it to Dave, and his eyes like nearly popped out of his head. And he was like, I don't know what this is, but all I know is you should make it into everything. And so cereal milk, so that was something I had kind of in my back pocket when I opened Milk Bar, to make this drinking milk cereal milk and this ice cream cereal milk. And crack pie was like this funny pie that I made for family meal when I worked at a restaurant in the Eastville, at Lower East Side, called WD-50, that I just made when I was just like messing around with my free time at a restaurant one day, and we didn't have enough. I wanted to make pie. I was reading about the history of pie. In the South, they make something called chess pie, which is actually just pie, J-U-S-T, but with like the Southern inflection over time became chess pie. And it's the pie you make when you don't have enough like rhubarb to make rhubarb pie, or pecans to make pecan pie. You make just pie. And it's basically all the like great, delicious, sweet, ooey gooey things. The Southern do it a little differently. I did it like a lot more like turn up the volume on Bob FM because we're in Austin, and like go. And it kind of named itself. I fed it to a bunch of coworkers, and they went cuckoo for it.
So at this point, the New York food scene had changed a lot.
Yes.
In large part because of Dave and you.
It was all happening right then. Like Eater launched. It was a thing. People had more access to dining because of that like online media component, but also people were more interested in food because we were democratizing it. We were making food. If you like to make food, you like to make food probably because you like to eat, but also because you like to feed people, because it's an amazing feeling when you can feed people what you make, especially when you bake them something. Handing someone a cookie is so much easier than being like, I made you a dish of lasagna or what have you. And people were responding. I opened Milk Bar, think about it, November 15th, 2008. Like, the economy was in a terrible, terrifying place, but New Yorkers are New Yorkers, and they're not going to, like, let that get them down. And the concept that you could come and be somewhere that was, like, edgy and a scene and, like, was curious and filled, like, your, like, creative spirit for $2 is like, get me in there. Like, get me in there. I will 100% go and wait in line. Waiting in line is a scene. When I get up to the counter, I can ask crazy questions about your crazy menu, and then I can be a part of it, and it costs $2. And so, yeah, it changed everything. And then the style with which, at least from a dessert standpoint, this, like, unapologetic, I personally believe, like, from a food business standpoint, we do our best when we can connect with the people that are coming in to be fed through our food. And the way that I'm not a big believer in talking over people. I'm a big believer in like letting the food talk for itself. And so you might not think that like truffles are this elegant thing if you grew up in Ohio and Virginia, but you know what flavors you do know? You know what pretzels are, and you know what cereal is, and you know what coffee and potato chips or banana crunchies or chocolate and hazelnut, you know all these things. So I was very unapologetic about the fact that like my flavor profile and where I started from was like, the food that's going to speak to you the most are the flavors that you know and you already have a relationship with, and those come from the grocery store, because that's where before dining out was really a thing and was as accessible. Those are the flavors that we knew and the memories that we had and the relationship that we had. So yeah, we turned the world upside down in how we were building a business, how we were creating a business that encouraged and allowed everyone in every day. And by the way in which we approached ingredients, certainly with like a technical approach as trained chefs, but also in a very humble, like, let me do the work. I just want to make you happy. I just want to bring you joy through this crazy, kooky little adventure.
When did you realize Milk Bar was going to be a thing?
I'll let you know. I'm just joking. The first day, that opening day for me, I was too busy kind of holding several different jobs. I would do things like, just to get it open, would invite friends over at like 3:00 in the morning to just help me sand benches so that I could like have a place for people to sit when we first opened. But that first day, I didn't have time to think about like, are people going to get it? Are they going to be offended by crack pie? Is a compost cookie going to sound good or weird to people? We opened the doors and I had no clue where all these people came from. We didn't tell anyone. We're always very like low key about saying when we're going to open. And within an hour, it was so clear that like I felt so understood. And it's not about me, but in a funny way, I was like, oh my God, the city is full of amazing, wonderful, like sweet-toothed soulmates. And that just like, it just brought me the greatest happiness. And it's what fueled me for months of being a zombie and still fuels me today.
It seems like the kind of product that really was born for it was perfectly designed for the East Village of New York
So
in the
true.
mid-2000s. Yeah. So how many shops do you have now?
We have 13 now. We're building 2 more. I know. And thank you. We're in New York, in DC, in Las Vegas, and in Toronto. And we're building a big one in DC right now. And then our first flagship in Los Angeles, both of which will open in a few short months.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk about those in a second. I want to talk about the growth of Christina over the last decade or so. When did you realize that you had to be a big part of the story, and how did you balance, R&D, coming up with really interesting desserts, with becoming more of a personality and TV star, all those things?
Oh, that's like a loaded question. It's a great question. I think first and foremost, if you know me just as a person, like I wear my heart on my sleeve. And if you get a piece of me, you basically get all of me, for good and for bad. And so getting Milk Bar means you get me. And so there was never a concept of separating one from the other. I am very right brain and left brain, like we just spoke about. And so for me, in fact, being creative all the time through just one avenue, i.e. through just food, would probably bore me. I like being in over my head, and I like having to switch gears and like kind of strengthen different muscle groups. So what I really loved about Milk Bar was feeding people and baking for people. That was like what I did for all of the waking hours, sometimes sleeping hours. And then during almost all of the sleeping hours is where I really became obsessed with understanding the business and growing the business. I didn't create a business plan to open Milk Bar. There was no pro forma. There was no measure of labor and food costs or cost of goods sold. There's no talk of EBITDA. Those were not real things. But I loved doing that part of it, and I found that it actually was a great escape to the innovative part of being in the kitchen. And over time, I found that I loved being really creative about the boring business part of things, and I liked bringing the boring business part of things to the really creative, innovative things, because I was like, girlfriend, what are you doing with this menu? It's big, it's broad, it makes all the sense in your head, and it makes no sense to the customer, which on some level is part of the journey, but on another level, like, it's overwhelming. And so I started doing this thing where I was like, oh my God, I think I have a great form, like I can solve this equation, this multivariable equation. I'm going to do, instead of this, I'm going to do this. But I will say that the past 7-8 years have been me being a lot more of a business person and a lot less of spending all of my time in the kitchen innovating. And it wasn't until I actually raised money for the first time ever last year that I actually had the resource to actually bring on some like real badass business people to my team to take some of the load of trying to wear like all the C-suite hats, and to just spend a lot of my time innovating in the kitchen.
Do you enjoy TV? Do you like doing that?
Oh, the TV thing. I enjoy doing it. One of the reasons that I chose to do it was like growing up, the access that we had, like how do we reach the world as kids? we weren't allowed to watch TV a ton, but it was through seeing or hearing or reading about role models, and not because there was a me when I was 7 or 8 or 9 or 20 or 30, but just seeing other people passionate about what they were doing and having a microphone on them to talk about it or to be a part of it was big. I'm also just a really big proponent of, like, if I have free time and I can give back, I think, like, you should always give more than you take. And so those are really important things for me. And just being like I'm not that young, but a young woman that is casual, but that means business, is different than what I see out there, and is important for me to, if it means I get less free time or I get less this or that, I think it's an important thing to put out into the world, because the world needs more of it.
So you raised this money last year, and
Yeah.
obviously you raised money to grow.
Yeah.
So growth is the plan. How do you approach that? What do you think about?
Well, I waited 9 years to raise money, and Milk Bar was profitable, thank goodness, based on that line. From we paid off that very, very, very small build out very quickly. I was very cautious about how to grow Milk Bar and when to grow Milk Bar over 9 years. I grew it. I would make certain decisions, like, I'm going to write this cookbook, and that will give me the money to build 2 stores. And I was very purposeful about it at that clip, and I wanted to always make sure that there was an authenticity and a steadiness about it. I think I look at my role as being like the custodian and the protector of, like, the heart of Milk Bar. And I think sometimes, I know that all the times when you have a great business, you get a lot of pressure to grow, and you get a lot of pressure to grow quick, and you get a lot of pressure to grow now, and you get a lot of pressure to just grow. And I think as the founder and as the entrepreneur and as the CEO, my role, I know that, is to understand what that means, to not be too stubborn about it, to not be so protective of it, but to understand what that means and what I believe is right for the business. So it took me that long to find a great financial partner that was going to support me and get me, and not just be like, show me the numbers, like we're either friends or we're enemies or whatever it is, that right relationship existed. And I also think because the world is changing, and I finally kind of have a sense of where I believe Milk Bar belongs in this ever-changing, very rapidly changing world. And so I think about that from more of an omni-channel approach. People are still going to come to New York. They're going to go to DC. You're going to want to come and visit us at one of the stores. But I got into it because I like to feed people, and the more people we can feed, the better. And we used to think that was just through opening more stores, but there are so many other ways to reach people. I'm a big online shopping person. We talked about that already. So being able to send a care package, my mom still sends, I'm a grown ass woman, and she still sends me care packages, and you want to know what? They still feel great when they arrive. She sends me cookies. I kid you not. She will send me cookies and candy, and they still feel great. And so that's part of our spirit beyond what you're going to get at the store. So having a really great opportunity to build an e-com platform, which we started long ago, but to leverage it more. Finding ways. I grew up, I thought the people that put the stuff on the shelves of the grocery store were the coolest people in the world. They had my dream job, because they're the people that make the decisions that feed us and that fuel us. And I might be the only person that thinks that going to the grocery store is the most inspiring experience ever, but it's also the food that inspires us. So thinking about how do we meet people in these other moments in their lives through channels beyond just, here's a store, here's my cash register, here's the menu, here's what it is, come and see us. Baking classes, educating people more. Basically, this omni-channel approach to this DIY baking revolution. And for me, being a baker it's about making baked goods, but it's so much deeper than just a cookie.
So a lot of times, cool kind of indie shops or brands raise a bunch of money to grow, and they get super diluted. They get boring, they get lame, they get tacky, they don't reinvent themselves. How, and your first store in the East Village was it was wacky and mildly dangerous. How do you obviously you can't do that as you grow. How do you maintain the personality of Milk Bar while also serving a lot more people?
It's a great question. I've learned a lot over the past 9, almost 10 years. I've made so many mistakes. I've made so many mistakes about trying to simplify it too much, because sometimes you go into like this mama bear, papa bear space of like, well, I can't do that. That's not safe anymore. And like everyone's going to try and assume, like once you actually start to understand how big the world is and how the world works and so on, you actually almost stand to take lesser risks, because as you build, you also realize that you have more to lose. So I try and just shut that part of my brain off, and of all of the risks that I've taken and the mistakes that I've made in growing Milk Bar to try to solve for this formula that you're talking about. I think the thing that I don't have it solved yet, but the thing that I do have solved about it is that the place where I can answer that best on the day-to-day is to go to a place where I shut off the rest of those things in my head, and I just go back to what I did before November 15th, 2008, which was like bury yourself in all of these other things, so much so that these like filters of worry and like the obnoxious voices in your head that try and tell you the things that you don't want to hear just don't have a platform to inform it on your decisions. And like, what is the truest form of what we do, and what would make us happy, and where would we want to be, and what would get me out of the house, or what would make me want to send someone this or that or what have you. And just trying to like dig to the deepest, most authentic part of who I am and who the amazing people on my team at Milk Bar are, and what's important to us and what we stand for. Because if we don't stand for it, then we have no business trying to create it for you, but to try and just 86 the rest of the fuzz in the equation. It's that simple, but also that complicated.
Most of your stores, at least the ones I've been into, are very small, very efficient.
Yeah.
Get your crack pie and then leave and eat it on the stoop or on a bench or a stool. But you mentioned you're going to do flagship stores. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? What's the environment that you want to kind of create in a bigger space?
Well, in like the boring business terms, the store level metrics of a store that's like 250 square feet is killer. Also, when you go into that store when it's busy as a consumer, it's like you're in this bottle where lightning's been captured, and it's frenetic and it's crazy and it's inspiring and it's great. As we've built more of those, it's like, okay, can you capture lightning in a bottle 9 different times in New York City? Yes, but it depends on the day and it depends on the time and so on. And what we're also realizing is that in doing that, what we ended up doing on like the deeper core of Milk Bar is you don't oftentimes get to see and experience and witness and touch and feel the deeper core of Milk Bar. You just like get to see our tentacles out there. So these bigger stores are more about revealing and opening the doors up into like the core of who we are. So seeing a lot more of our kitchens and getting to see what we're working on in our like kooky R&D test kitchens, and taking baking classes and letting us like give you the who's and the what's and the where's and the why's of who we are and how we approach life, and how we do that through these like crazy unfrosted cakes and so on and so forth. Because I think the world just needs more of that like liberation of like, dude, go out and get lost in 5 seconds when you eat a cookie. If you eat it fast, that's how I eat it. Or 2 hours because you're learning how to do something like wholly unreasonable, like layer a cake and then take it home and eat it, because like life's not getting any longer. I mean, like life's short, right?
Yeah.
And
get lost in a cookie. I like that.
Yeah, just to these bigger stores are for us more of a like, oh my God, we've been so busy trying to figure out this formula, and we've been like trying to be safe and secure and pragmatic about it, that all of a sudden we're like, wait, what are we doing? We love to be around, all of us love to be around people, not just the people at our store. So for us, it's like a little bit more of like an opening of the kimono, if you will, of like, we're here and we want to let you in more. And that's what those big stores will be.
How often and how fast do you feel like you need to change things up and keep things fresh versus just getting the core Milk Bar lifestyle out to new people?
That's a good question. This is a question that I think is a very right brain, left brain question, at least in the way that it sits in my head still and currently. So at Milk Bar, we have four products that everyone comes for and everyone eats nonstop all the time. And it's birthday truffles, those little nuggets you should be shoving in your mouth right now. If it's been a second since you had one, it's time to double down. Crack pie, compost cookies, and cereal milk ice cream. the spirit of Milk Bar is based on innovation. It's based on creativity. And so the operational reality is that no matter how many things we do create, you're inspired by them likely. It's exciting to see them on the menu, but my business reality is that you're probably still just going to order birthday truffles. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're delicious, right? But that's what you want. The reality, like the reason that baked goods have forever been a peanut butter cookie, an oatmeal raisin cookie, a chocolate chip cookie, an apple pie, vanilla cake with chocolate frosting on yellow cake, is that we crave what we crave and we know what we know, and that's our safe and happy and indulgent place. It's the place we go to escape. And so innovation will always stay on our menu, but innovation nowadays we find is more for us and less because you're curious about it. Maybe you taste the new soft serve flavor, but it's because you love what you love. So for us, we look at it as an opportunity to try and like dethrone one of these like top 4 reigning, ruling, amazing baked goods. But we also know that a lot of times it's either for the person that's coming in that's like, I want the thing that's never existed before, or because it fuels your creativity but isn't necessarily what you're choosing to fuel your indulgence. So it's an interesting business problem to have. It's almost like a marketing fund when you think about it. The R&D end of it ends up becoming more marketing than it ends up becoming like bottom line profit generator.
Wow.
Can you believe that? Isn't that
Amazing.
incredible? I really just opened the kimono for you. Like, that's a lot of information. But also, that is also not to shame anyone. I still go in and I'm like, I just want cereal milk soft serve with cornflake crunch. Like, don't mess. And as a chef, it's weird. Most chefs, when you go into restaurants, from an ego standpoint, we want to always be creating. We don't want to serve you the same thing that we served you last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. But I think humility is such an important part of the equation to be like, if that's what the people want and the people love, we are a part of their lives. I was sitting next to someone at dinner last night who told me that he had 2 young boys and we're part of their birthdays every year. One's 4 and one's 9, and they get nothing else for their birthday, no presents. All they get is one birthday cake. And that, for me, is like, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. That's a beautiful thing. So for me, it's the balance of having an amazing, incredible business that people respond to, that they bond to, that they carry with them through life, with like how to have that amazing approach to life, which is curious and a choose your own adventure approach to taking risks and trying new things in the kitchen and in the business. And you'll see a lot of both of those. But you might just be walking out with a compost cookie, which is like more power to you. I hear you. I feel you.
How much time do you spend in the kitchen goofing around with recipe ideas, or is that all a team now?
It depends. There is a team now. I would say before I closed this round last year, it was much more of a team working in there, and then me coming, like swooping in, stuffing my face, feedback, swoop out, swoop back in. The cycle continues. I probably spend 8 to 10 hours a week, and it's usually somewhere between like 4 p.m. and 2 a.m. sort of thing. And I actually do a lot more R&D right now in my home kitchen first. That's what I've been doing a lot lately in the past 6 months, because I think it goes back to that, like, I have more responsibility on my shoulders, with every day that Milk Bar grows, and how do I dig deep and 86 the fuzz and remember and connect with like the most authentic part of who I am and how I think and how my brain clicks and ticks. And it's very simple. It's like at home, I literally just brought a stand mixer into my house. That's crazy for a pastry chef to say, but like I'm mixing stuff in like these old like Corningware bowls that my grandma gave me long ago, and somehow that is where I am finding the most magic right now. I'm sure that will change, but that's what it is now. It's in my home kitchen at crazy hours late at night.
What is the,
and then I bring it into the Milk Bar
What is
kitchen.
the best / wackiest new thing you've made recently?
I'm working on we're working on ice cream right now, and I don't exactly have an answer because the way my head works is I'm like, ice cream, what do you think about it? What do we have? What do we not have? What do we think needs to exist in the world? Because I'm not a big fan of like creating just to create. Like, is it going to be additive to the world? Is it something the world needs?
Plus, there was already a froyo bubble and crash.
Yeah. We don't need any more
We don't need that
froyo.
again.
I can guarantee you that. But what is that? Like, is it sundaes? Is it ice cream cones? Is it ice cream cakes? Is it like, what is it? Is kind of where I'm at. And I'm like, the way I work is I throw darts at a wall, and my husband is like, please stop leaving me alone at home with all this cake, or please stop leaving me alone at home with like my fridge is just pint containers of labels of things, because I have a lot of ideas, and rather than try and focus them immediately, I need to throw darts at all of them and taste all of them, and sometimes sleep on it and sleep on it and sleep on it and see what I actually start to like magnetize and gravitate to, and then I funnel it down. So I'm like in like mid funnel. I haven't quite gotten down to the center of it, but it's, the warmer weather is upon us, and ice cream is something that we innovate around from a flavor of this flavored milk that we whip into an ice cream for you. But the other like accoutrements, if you will, of ice cream is something that we have never really delved into, except for 10 years ago when I had this like crazy list of 10 different toppings that you could
And
get
when I was eating
on your ice cream.
Milk Bar soft serve with sriracha sauce on top of it.
I mean, my friends, you were also ahead of your time, right? Super spicy, super acidic. Also, sriracha was not as hip then as it is now, or kind of was until the other stuff. I'll stop talking. But yeah, hot, spicy sauce on your ice cream, that's a thing. I used to make a red bell pepper caramel. That was actually a top. Maybe, I wonder if that's what it was. No, because you had a sriracha
No, because
bottle.
you used to sell the pork buns, so just take the sauce and put it on top of the ice cream.
We used to have a red bell pepper caramel as a topping on that topping bar. And in 2008, people were like, what is that? Or like, this is so cool.
Now that's in everyone's
I love
basket
a
on
compost
shelf.
cookie. Yeah.
We will open up to audience questions too. Anyone have a question for Christina? Michelle has a microphone.
I think they're all in sugar comas.
It's true. I see a hand. How are we gonna pass the mic?
Here, it's on. Cool. Hey, I'm just wondering, whenever you go into a new market, like say LA or Vegas, how much do you pay attention to like the market and like the demographics of that area? And subsequently, does the new market fuel innovation with what you do?
That's a good question. So that's a good right brain, left brain question, I'd say. I study a lot of the demographics. I spend a lot of time in a new market before we open up in it. One, because I love to travel and I'm very curious, and part of how I make that real estate decision of what market we're going into, it typically comes from a very honest place of like, where do I want to spend my time? Like, where am I vibing with? Because if I'm not vibing with this place, Milk Bar's not going to vibe with this place. But if this place feels like I would love to quit my job and move here, I'm not quitting my job. I love my job. But like, it has to have that spirit of like, take me into a dreamlike trance of like imagining what life is like there. Then for me, Milk Bar can be a home. If it checks that box, then I do a deep dive into the demographics, like the basic demographics from real estate partners, and then the demographics from other entrepreneurs that might be in the space, whether they're in food or they're in fashion or they're in beauty or in other categories in that market, just to understand like, what are the day parts and the night parts? And Miami's a really interesting one that I like deep dove into 6 months ago. And it's great to go there when it's warm. It gets really hot there in the summertime. And in certain neighborhoods, if you're not at the beach, 100%, you're not going to Wynwood, for example, because, at least not right now, because it's freaking hot in August. And so when I compare it to the New York market, which is the market that we know best, God bless the New York market. Like, people are out all hours of the day and the night. There's always people there. Even as New Yorkers, when we're trying to escape, other people are trying to get in. And so the real estate prices are high, but you always have a captive audience, and that's not always the case in other markets. So trying to figure that out. And then if that can make sense, it's really figuring out like, what's the literal appetite of this market? Yes, the like business appetite of it, but why do we think we deserve the right to come in here? I think coming into it with a humility of like, what's cool in this town? What do people like to eat? What do people not like to eat? Like, why do we think we deserve to call this place home is how we think a lot about our product mix and our menu offering and what's inspiring about it and how we're going to win over a town that could absolutely reserve the right to say, like, well, this is my home. You want to call it your home now? And that's how I think about it. It's like with the utmost humility, with like strong business acumen, but humility first and foremost in every way. And I think that's a success and a threat for a lot of businesses that are growing into new markets. If you don't have that customer, if we're not obsessed with our customers from a customer obsession standpoint, and if our customers aren't obsessed with us, then then the other parts of like the numerical values of day parts and night parts and so on, it doesn't actually matter, because it also won't be worth it for us. We're passionate, and if that passion doesn't travel through, then kind of what's the point?
So earlier on, you were talking about how when you go into restaurants, you look at their menus and you said, I see you. So my question really is, how much of your inspiration comes from like what you're doing versus what you're seeing other people do?
I know that at Milk Bar, now more so than ever, it's tricky. I have an amazing team. A lot of them have now come in from being like ballers and pros for other businesses. And so they have a very specific approach. And so much of it is, what are other people doing? What's hot? What is the market demanding? For 9 years, I've raised and grown this business with this concept of like earmuffs, blinders, we need to do us. And what is that? And that's such a more difficult thing to dig deep into, actually like unearth and then make into a reality and then put on the menu and feed you. So we do a lot more competitive research now, but for me it's like, great, education is important. Obviously, I think you know that now about me, but then it's important to learn how to paint by numbers, and then it's really important to just be like, I'm gonna color outside the lines. So I'd say we are a lot more educated now on the competitive landscape. The competitive landscape also didn't exist 9 years ago, 10 years ago, but more than anything, it's like, great, let's know what we're gonna know, and then let's be like, here's this amazing college degree, I'm gonna put it right here, and I'm gonna go blaze my own trail. So it's both of those things, but more than anything, it's like, let's be studied, and then let's blowtorch it.
Along those lines, how do you deal with copycats, since there are a lot of them?
It's a very emotional thing. I'm much better at it now than I have been in the past. You know, my approach that I am currently holding is this. We have a democratic approach to everything. I've written cookbooks. Every recipe to almost every single thing we've made is out there, and it's there to add. I learned how to bake because whoever came up with the apple pie shared the recipe, and I wouldn't be where I am if that weren't the case. You will always be welcome in our wild, wonderful, wacky world, but be additive. Don't be inspired, be additive. You'll always be welcome in our world, but please don't try and like bite off our world and call it yours. You're better than, like, for me, my thing is like, you're better than that. You're not giving your brain and your imagination and your curiosity enough credit. But at the same time, I totally understand the business approach. There are plenty of businesses that are gonna like knock off whatever great burger or salad or juice or bakery concept in like a second or third tier city, or a city that's much further away than a town that we've gone into. And I don't know. I think for me, it's just like, I just take a step back and I try and like be like, if my grandma was like looking at me, what would she be proud of? And what would she be like? Roll her eyes and take a deep breath and be like, girl, you need to grow up. And more than anything, it's like, it's pretty amazing that what I've created in almost 10 years is something that has been so inspiring to people that they just like need and want more of it, and that people don't frost the sides of the cake, and that people want to make things that taste like cereal milk. And I didn't invent cereal, and I didn't invent milk, and I didn't invent pouring milk over cereal, and I didn't invent drinking the bottom of the bowl of cereal. I was just super inspired by it and created it. And that's amazing. And if people people can do with that as they will, I suppose. I have my creative approach and then my more reasonable person in the world approach to it.
All right, Christina Tosi, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Talking in my sleep at night, making myself crazy. Out of my mind, out of my mind. Wrote it down and read it out, hoping it would save me.